You're on the Bible Forum at the tail end of this COVID-19 debacle. And I'm here to tell you, you ain't seen nothing yet. Get used to emergencies. According to a website calling itself zerohedge.com, an 18th century French banker and philosopher named Richard Cantillon noticed an early version of the dichotomy of the weak versus everyone else. He wrote a book on this phenomenon. He called it, quote, an essay on economic theory. His basic theory was that whomever benefits when the state prints up a bunch of money is based on the institutional setup of that state. In the 18th century, for you public school educated children, that's 1700s. In the 18th century, this meant that the closer you were to the king and the wealthy, the more you benefited. And the farther away you were, well, the more you were harmed. Money, in other words, is not neutral. The general observation that money printing has distributional consequences that operate through the price system is something known as the Cantillon effect. Today, it's not the king's courtiers who benefit. It's who is in closest proximity to the Fed. The primary dealers, investment bankers, hedge funds, private equity, venture capitalists, and corporate monopolists. Even in Cantillon's day, new money would come into the kingdom generally because of conquest, trade, mercantilism, or taxation. Those in court tended to do well whenever the money simply increased. Today, we can print money right out of thin air and then exchange it for equity stakes in the means of production the way central banks can today. Imagine being able to do that for the world's reserve currency. Then try to imagine that power and wealth diffused through society equally and proportionally. The truth is you can't, because it doesn't, and it won't. It never has. Today, as we're hit with this pandemic, this unidirectional wealth transfer has to be spun in a way that marks the subjects don't understand they are being robbed blind. Did you receive your government credit card yet? It's a Visa card with your stimulus payout loaded onto it. I got mine this week. There is nothing fiscally sound about simply giving American citizens $1,200 or $1,400 each. And many Americans are receiving more than this in government stimuli. Of course, there are tens of thousands of American businesses that will never survive the corona shutdown. To an increasing number of Americans, it looks like the government finally set aside any silly notions of fiscal prudence in order to further build out the welfare state for the good of the society. There's an entire segment of the population who is now taking home more money from government stimulus and bailouts than they were when they were working for a living. What's really happening is that the fiat currencies, that's the stuff they make out of thin air, which are being printed currently due to Congress voting more money into the system, and distributed to the underclass in the forms of various stimuli and aid packages, are essentially a form of company script. It isn't actually worth a whole lot. Companies today are borrowing money at artificially low rates to buy back their own shares, which are trading at or near all-time highs. Out of the 500 companies in the S&P 500 in 2016, 146 of them spent more on buybacks than they actually made in earnings. Over time, the wealth inequity has to widen. Wealth inequality will be even more starkly exacerbated as global currencies wither into money-like coupons and food stamps, redeemable within approved digital ecosystems on curated transactions. Those are not my words. You knew that. Experts are saying it that way. Contact tracing, immunity passports, other health initiatives are going to morph into social credit frameworks worthy of China, from which the political class will almost certainly be exempt. The people who decree and implement these measures will enjoy a life of comparative plenty and freedom. Under this great bifurcation scenario, humanity drifts apart, H.G. Wells style, into two separate groups. Bifurcation is when a small change in one area stimulates a large change in another area. The capstone class will be our patrician overseers who have the science, the models, the economic toolkits to deftly guide society through this jackpot. The other will be a much larger underclass of comparatively childlike simpletons who believe fake news, have negative equity, no assets, and generally can't be trusted to be left in a room alone with sharp objects. They'll need shepherding, and the newly ascendant social credit system will give them the right dopamine hits at the right time to do it. Somewhere between these two groups will exist an impenetrable membrane of norms, culture, narrative, and even law that enforce this social divide. In the past, this scenario would take generations to prevail. However, given the exigencies of the jackpot and what I expect to be a never-ending state of compounding emergencies, the time frame may be greatly accelerated. The author of this piece expects government and business to bombard us with routine emergencies, which would require otherwise repugnant responses. This current crisis we're going through is a case in point. And all of this will keep us both on edge and unable to get ahead, at least monetarily speaking. We know there's a segment of our global business class that has no moral compunction to do right. We also know there's a political class that never wants to let an emergency go to waste. Add to that a religious class that never wants to let an emergency go to waste. You see, God is at work in this ministry. Send those dollars and be part of a great movement of God upon the earth. And what do we get? A constraint drain on our income and living conditions. Now, I hope not. But the Bible indicates quite clearly that the end times will be days of great spiritual deception, turmoil, and deceit. Famine will run around the world. The world will be at war. Israel will be at the center of it all. And once the church is removed, there's not going to be anything left to keep people from pursuing their own desires, unhindered. That's the cheery news this holiday weekend.